Coming up, as the second preseason game looms just days away, we take a look at the New York Football Giants, the state of the injury report, who's back, who's out, and where do we really feel confident on the offensive and defensive side of the ball? Just 1 week in, still plenty of time, but we are getting sample sizes that could be concerning. We break it down next. Yes, friends. It is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, as always, we are, of course, your host over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the Brooklyn Nets and the Locked On Nets podcast. My boy, Doug Norrie, and yonder there, the season generational ticket holder, the healthy, wealthy, and wise Mr. Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir?
Adam, I'm good. First check. Are you healthy? Are you doing okay?
I got to tell you, actually, something we didn't talk about in the pre-show. I woke up in the middle of the night when I was rolling over because from my shoulder to behind my ear cracked all the way down my neck. And I thought, you know what? Middle of the night, kind of groggy. Go back to sleep. Yeah, go back to sleep. And then I woke up this morning and turns out, yeah, it hurts. So I'm not as healthy as I could be. I'm playing a little bit under the gun here.
So are we going to put you on the PUP list as well? Are you going on IR, or are you going to play through it? Like, what should we be thinking about in terms of your health here?
I got to be honest with you. If we're going from a Giants perspective, it seems like they play things pretty cautious, and that's where we're going to start this conversation. I power through. I'm out there getting the reps, but when we talk about the New York Football Giants and where things are headed in the next preseason game with the Bengals, obviously a lot to still work on. We're going to talk about both sides of the football, but injury updates. Let's start with the really positive one. Azeez Ojulari ready to get back out there on the field for Big Blue.
Yeah, it's good to see him come off of the PUP list. Azeez Ojulari was out there in practice yesterday. It's what the Giants want to see, the two-headed monster between Kayvon Thibodeau and Azeez Ojulari. I will say his absence allowed people like Quincy Roche and others to be able to get some reps, which I think are important. We mentioned that before, just like we want to see what we have behind those two. We know those two are going to probably be pretty successful this year, but what kind of depth do we have? Mm-hmm. But it is good with all the other news that we're going to talk about to hear that one of our starters is coming back onto the practice field, Adam.
Yeah, you'd like to see the guys that are top of the depth chart be available for you, obviously. And again, we know it's managing a lot of things as you work your way through August, but, it always feels easy to say, yeah, it's just a preseason. It's just camp. You don't want to risk anything. Okay. And then week 2, and then week 3, and then it's, the final week of August, and you're looking down your first game against Tennessee Titans. So all these things matter. Good to see him back out there. On the other side of it, though, I could say things like John Feliciano, Elerson Smith, Kadarius Toney, Shane Lemieux, Ezeudu, right? I can just say the names. There's a lot of factors there inside of it when it comes to guys that are coming in and out of practice, trying to come back from injuries, even going all the way back to the preseason game in the case of Shane Lemieux in the toe.
Man, I mean, let's start with the Shane Lemieux toe injury. Obviously, it happened during the first preseason game. He hasn't been out there. They said it's unlikely that he's going to be practicing this week. That's a tough one because people kind of have to shift around when Shane Lemieux is not out there. He also can cover up a little bit over center, as we saw him getting some reps when Feliciano was out with a heat injury. Mm-hmm. So him not being there and his versatility to start is a challenge. When Daboll asked, it didn't sound like it was a day-to-day thing. It sounded more like, oh, we'll see when the next time he can get back out there. Didn't even fully commit to him being out there for week 1 against the Titans. So for me, that's a big red flag, considering Shane Lemieux is supposed to be our starting left guard. When the depth chart came out, he was there, and already we're starting to see an offensive line that wasn't great last year is already starting to see some of these injuries.
Yeah, and then if you want to just do what is the dominoes falling here, right? So Shane Lemieux goes out with the toe injury. They work their way through the preseason game. We see Ezeudu get some reps, but then over practice, we have John Feliciano leaves practice with an apparent injury. Ben Bredesen, who was plugging in at the left guard spot, moves inside to center. But then the left guard spot becomes interesting because also you have the rookie Ezeudu working through some things, which doesn't sound too extreme as Daboll said it. But to your point, like, it's weird. I want to wrap it inside of this big bubble of, okay, some things can be managing stuff. Like when you hear Ezeudu, you go, all right, well, he already flashed pretty good in the first preseason game. Let's not risk anything. We have some injuries already. Obviously, Shane Lemieux's timetable is the timetable. I'll tell you what, Feliciano, who looked strong when he was out there in the preseason game, I am having growing concerns because this guy is now up to 2 injury or, injury related things when it comes to being able to practice. You add in the little skirmish with the practice as far as just being a leader across the offensive line. Like, Feliciano's transitioning to center, and this guy is not getting max reps and developing a rapport necessarily with Daniel Jones.
Well, when Feliciano isn't out there, Adam, it also makes this like merry-go-round of moves that need to happen for the offensive line. And the big problem with that is that we can't get continuity. We need some of that of guys like being in one spot, getting some reps to be ready for week one. When Feliciano isn't out there, you just mentioned Bredesen was filling in at left guard. Now he slides over to center. Who's filling left guard? Oh, it would be Ezeudu. But as Brian Daboll just came out, Ezeudu is quote unquote working through some things physically and is listed as questionable for the week. We can't get guys out there that are going to be ready for week one, and that's a concern. It's not like this is a seasoned offensive line that has been together for a few years and guys are kind of just working through some things in the preseason. This is a completely new offensive line. Think about it. You have Andrew Thomas, who was the stalwart at left tackle. Other than that, Shane Lemieux played a handful of snaps last year. Everyone else is new across this offensive line. It's a big concern for me. Whether these are just knocks or small injuries, whether the toe injuries is serious for Shane Lemieux, if we can't get guys out there getting reps together, how are we going to be able to deal with week one, the Tennessee Titans pass rush, or be able to move the ball consistently? I'm already starting to have concerns with all of these injuries across the offensive line.
Yeah, and then you can throw into, and not that we don't expect him to be good, but Evan Neal is a rookie, right? So you have a rookie tackle who's trying to come on here. No concerns on the right side of the line at this point from an injury standpoint, knock wood. But you're right. It's just, again, for whatever it is, to however concerned you want to be in preseason, it's always worse to have more injuries. And when you start to see them condensing specifically around the offensive line, we'll mention here just quickly in terms of inside of this injury conversation, moves that were made on the roster. We mentioned last week, it's looming here, the 85-man cut down. The Giants did release or waived Michael Jacquet, the cornerback, also waived Josh Revis, which, listen, bodies are bodies, guys. At some point here, we really can't be afforded to waive warm pulses. But they both get waived. And then also Gerard Wilson was terminated on the vested veteran all contracts route, the DB there as well. So they've made a couple of moves. They're down to 87. They have a little bit of wiggle room here. But when we talk about these injuries, you still got to get your way through these next couple of weeks. And, and we didn't even get to Andrew Miller, excuse me, also who, not placed on, right? He did not go on IR. So that's technically a good thing.
Yeah, so while he's in a cast for kind of the injury that he suffered previously, looked great, caught touchdowns in some of the FanFest stuff, was exciting because there feels like there is an open competition behind Daniel Bellinger for that second tight end or third tight end spot that the Giants have. The assumption was that he was going to be placed on IR after fracturing his arm. By them not putting him on there is encouraging because it means there's a chance or an opportunity for him to potentially come back this season. If he get put on IR during the preseason, it means he's out for the entire year. So slightly encouraging on that front for the the Andre Miller piece of it, but
I was going to say, but also it's Andre Miller transitioning from wide receiver to tight end. You saw Austin Allen; he had a catch or two in the preseason game. Didn't see any Ricky Seals-Jones, who continues to not be out there available. Like, he's a guy that I start to look at and say, like, I don't know, at some point, depending on what your intentions are going into the season, if you're not playing at all, maybe you already feel like we know what he is, whatever. But if there's little injury concerns, when push comes to shove, and we're going to talk about it a little bit from a roster standpoint, you're going to have to make some hard decisions. And I do wonder which direction the Giants are going to lean, the veteran over the youth potentially, and just kind of say, hey, we'll see what we have when we go to the regular season.
Last piece on the offensive side of the ball. Kadarius Toney probably will not practice this week, is what Daboll said. Most likely that he's going to sit out. Again, if this was just a one-time thing with him, that's fine. But obviously, it's a concern knowing that Kadarius Toney has had injury issues in his short NFL career. Is this something that you're going to circle and keep an eye on, or are you just going to say they're monitoring his reps as long as he's out there next, for the preseason game or whatever? I'm going to be fine with it.
Yeah, I mean, he is coming from off season, right? He had the injury, had the surgery. They got in there and tried to take care of some things. So I don't think you can look at it and say, this is what happens. You start to ramp yourself back up. You have a little bit of setbacks. They're going to try to be cautious with him. I'll say just in tandem with that, not injury related, but Wan'Dale Robinson's reps have been getting pulled back in practice. And Art Stapleton was basically, he speculated, and I tend to agree with him, is already showed you enough. No need to risk it. Got another concern here in our wide receiver room. Why are we going to risk Wan'Dale Robinson ahead of the regular season, knowing that everything else, which we'll get back to here in a minute, everything else going on the offensive side, you have to, I think, be cautious around everyone. And that does include Kadarius Toney, of course, because you'd rather see none of him for the rest of the preseason and then have him be ready to go or as close to 100% when things get going week one.
Yeah, and switching over to the defensive side of the ball, we talked about Azeez
Sure.
Ojulari coming back at him, but with all good things, you take one step forward and then 2 steps back. Elerson Smith came up injured, had to be basically carried off with the trainers, did not look good. Jihad Ward had to leave practice as well. So we get one of our edge rushers back. We lose 2 of them during practice. Don't know the severity of those injuries yet, but it's tough. You want to see all these guys out there getting all of these reps. And to hear, a position that the Giants really had struggled in last year, having the least amount of sacks in the NFL, you want to see these guys getting out there and getting reps.
Yeah, and I'll say too, because we'll kind of, this is dovetailing off of the injuries, but a guy like Elerson Smith, this is what happens. And maybe, Kadarius Toney, it feels the same way. Someone that has injuries in their rookie year and then comes back and looks pretty good and then has another injury, right? Like those things. Same thing with Shane Lemieux, by the way, right? Suffers an injury in his second year. Now he comes back feeling pretty good. Toe injury. I mean, listen, it's fluky, it's whatever, but it happened, right? Sometimes there's just guys that seem to consistently have those little concerns, and that makes it hard to rely on them with consistency. Now, in the case of Kadarius Toney, a first-round pick, it looms that much larger in the spectrum of things. For the Giants specifically, Shane Lemieux matters a lot because, as you said, he's in a starting role, and Elerson Smith, at least it seemed like a later-round pick, but was kind of getting pegged as a really nice depth piece that was going to develop well inside of Wink Martindale's specific system.
Yeah, and I saw that Art Stapleton even had said, listen, it's tough when these guys go out. Quincy Roche has looked pretty good. You would hope that Jihad Ward or Elerson Smith could step up and be one of those rotational guys. Maybe Quincy Roche becomes a little bit of a trade piece and you can address other areas of need. If you end up having 5 or 6 different pass rushers that can get to the quarterback, you look at one of them and say, if we could get a mid-round pick for him after claiming him off waivers, maybe that's a win for the Giants as we continue to revamp this roster.
Yeah, that's possible too, for sure. And I guess like Ocean Jimenez would fall into that category as well, right? But only if you feel like you have the health at the position, so you have the flexibility to go do it. But it's going to get to, I think we'll eventually, we did a lot of pre-show. I did a lot of pre-show speculation around what I wanted to discuss today. Maybe we'll get to it on the back end here, but specifically on the defensive side of the ball, as we talk about what practices have looked like and even what preseason game number 1 looks like. I had a very interesting thought around this. The defense continues to look strong and dominant in practice, and that feeds into what's happening with the offensive side of the ball that we'll discuss here. However, do you think it's at all concerning that in conjunction with, so they blitzed, did Wink Martindale, and I know you're going to highlight this is what Wink is. They blitzed 21 or 22 times in that preseason game, when the average preseason game blitzes are about 3. So they're bringing the heat. And that's great. However, when you hear that they're dominating in practice and then they go out and they don't necessarily get home a ton, and in practice, Aaron Robinson was looking pretty strong and he goes out and gets absolutely torched. Where are we? Where are we on our barometer of what we think about this defensive side of the ball? I know we're confident in the coaching staff. We're confident in a lot of the pieces. But as we said, like these preseason games start to give you these sample sizes. And until you go up against other competition, real competition, you can't gauge it. Some guys showed up and looked really strong. Other areas I did think highlighted, at least, for the next week to 10 days, we're going to have some concerns.
So you bring up very valid points, Adam.
Thank you.
I will start with the overarching feeling that I have.
All right.
And I will ask you a very quick question. What was the team's identity last season on defense?
They didn't have one.
Right. I would agree. I don't think there was necessarily anything that you would point to and say, this is their identity. I believe at the very least.
In theory, coming into the year, they thought they were going to be a coverage defense, but then Bradbury's play in man-to-man coverage really fell apart. But sorry, I just had the thought come across, right? You have quality players, good guys on the back end with Logan Ryan and all that talent, right? So it felt like the secondary going to cover you until we can get to you.
Right. And we couldn't get to the quarterback at all last year, so it all falls apart.
Sure.
You hope that coverage means the guys are guarded and that people have more time to get to the quarterback up front. That didn't work that way. The reason why I bring this up from a very high level, Adam, is because the way that I think about this is Wink has given this defense an identity. And he's like, we are going full steam ahead. We are bringing pressure. We're not gonna sit back on our heels and let you dictate. We are going to dictate. And at the very least, what that's doing is saying, we're going to find out what players we have here that can do what Wink Martindale needs us to do. And if you can't do it, we have to find someone else that will. But we're not changing our defense around because this guy isn't necessarily good at it. We're going to find someone else who can do that. So at a very high level, I do like the way that he's approaching this, which is like, we have a system and we want guys that fit that system. I think we tried so many times before to be like, well, this guy's a good piece. This guy's a good piece. How do we do this? How do we move things around? It's like, no, a guy could be a great player and maybe not fit the scheme that you want. If he doesn't fit, we have to figure out someone that will. So at a very high level, I like that overall approach.
Yeah, that's a good point to bring up. Like, this is what we're doing, and you need to fit the role that you have here. And there's we know that there's versatility within that, guys that can do multiple things in a defense. But ultimately, this is the mentality we have. This is our approach, and I think we'll see as it plays out over the regular season, certainly preseason and regular season. I think there is going to be some home run swings and some strikeouts for this defensive unit, right? There's going to be some series where you go for it all out. Here we come. And it breaks down on the back end and a big play is given up. But then likewise, you can have series where you're able to come out because you're just firing on all cylinders. It's disruptive. It creates turnovers. It creates quick 3 and out. So yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you on that standpoint. You have an identity now. The question is, how much are these injuries and how much is the growth and development of young players going to hinder or slow that process as we work through it?
So, and after looking at the first preseason game, you saw Aaron Robinson struggle mightily on the outside. Like that was the big glaring issue where everyone's like, oh man, he's getting picked on. He's really struggling over there. What I will say is, while that didn't look good, what we're seeing is something that's even more surprising, which is Darnay Holmes is seizing the day. Like, he is saying, I am an athlete. I can cover in the slot. I can get into the backfield. I can block, deflect passes, and I can intercept the ball. And going into this, we kind of said, oh, we're going to give Aaron Robinson the first crack on the outside. We said, oh, Cordell Flott, they drafted him early. Maybe he's got the inner track. Darnay Holmes has grabbed that nickel corner, spot, and he's run with it. And so if at the very least, under Wink Martindale's system, it's encouraging to see someone like Darnay Holmes say, nope, I've got my position. We're good here. Go figure out the other side, the outside of Adoree Jackson. That's your concern, not where I am. So I think it's good. While there's concerns, we have filled other holes that I think were question marks going into this camp.
That's a good global. Another good global perspective, right? And we talk about what is the philosophy, what is this team trying to do this year from a competitive standpoint, from a developmental standpoint, just, what is the expectations? And I guess you could say that, right? Like we didn't say Aaron Robinson is going to be a shutdown corner across from Adoree Jackson, but he's the first guy that's going to get first crack at it. And we're not going to say that it's over for him, but obviously the first sample size wasn't particularly strong for him. We'll see how he looks over the rest of the summer. But to your point, we are checking, like, if you can check a box, you check a box. And Darnay Holmes is checking a box right now for them. We feel like we already have boxes checked on the back end of this secondary. So you pick up the positive that you can. And he's at a good camp, has strong camp, and had a strong preseason game. And I'll even throw in there, if we want to talk about what are the expectations for the rest of that secondary unit. You mentioned Cordell Flott. He got reps on the outside in the preseason game as it moved along. And I'm also just going to mention him because I thought in watching them, the competition level keeps sliding as you work your way through the game. But some guys looked okay. Some guys just they were out there. I thought that Darren Evans looked like he knew where to be on the field. He was staying competitive on all the outside reps, and he was doing a nice job instinctually closing on plays if it was a running play or a pass out of the backfield. So I'm going to that's a guy. We'll throw the name out there. Watch for how he looks as he develops, because whatever Aaron Robinson is going to be or not be at the top, you do have these other younger players as well that you're trying to bring along in this process too.
And don't forget, we saw my guy Rodarius Williams. So we said Aaron Robinson's the first man up. Obviously, the first preseason game didn't look good. Not going to go crazy and overreact and say he's not the guy definitively now, but he needs to show in the next preseason game that he can be effective on the outside or not be the guy that's just getting picked on and targeted, or else we are going to have to find someone else to fill that void.
Yeah, and we're going to go back over to the offensive side here to close things out. But to your point, I think Aaron Robinson, every opportunity to start this next preseason game, but probably, the tighter you get to the season, it's going to be, hey, it's going to be whoever's looking good on a week-to-week basis might be the guy that picks up that mantle. And obviously other players are going to have a chance to make a claim for themselves as well. Offensively, we said this a number of times before, offensive concerns. You threw over this one to me in the pre-show here, obviously, from Dan Dugan. Just a brutal day for the Giants offense. This is going on for Sunday's practice. 6 of 19 for Daniel Jones, 2 interceptions, Adoree Jackson, and our boy now, Darnay Holmes. Jones also had to scramble a handful of times because of protection issues. We keep coming back to this. The defense is looking dominant in practice. So whatever they're going to be, they're going to be. But what is this saying about the offensive side of the ball? I know we had a good post game, live conversation, the quarterback spot, and blah, blah, blah. I'm not trying to tap into that into anything more than, to this point, Daniel Jones has had what, 2 or 3 consistent practices where he's looked good relative to 15 practices that they had. Some with pads, some not, situational football. Are you a little bit concerned? Because I did have one thought going back to the preseason game, but I just wanted to see where you stand, because we know on the show you are the more positive Daniel Jones guy. Are you being swayed at all when you hear these kind of reports that have been pretty consistent out of camp?
Yes, I am, because you don't
Yeah.
hear this from every other camp. You don't hear, unless the media is sitting there being like, we don't know if this is a guy. We talked about this before. You hear about Carson Wentz's struggles in Washington. It's like, it's no secret he turns the ball over and he continues to turn the ball over. That is a problem. People are saying that Daniel Jones is holding the ball too much, or he's making bad decisions when he does hold the ball. Those things are happening still. Like, they're talking about he went 6 of 19. Some of those he would have been sacked because of the protection issues
Sure.
up front.
Yeah.
Some of them he's just throwing the ball to try to make plays. So like, the 6 of 19 seems appalling when you first read it, but you're like, okay, probably in camp, just throw the ball, get some reps for the defense, the offense, so on and so forth. But it is concerning. I mean, you saw his week 1 preseason against the Patriots. He was able to move the ball with some success, got down the field. Obviously, they ended up kicking a field goal. That to me felt pretty good. Like, there's things that we can improve on. But yeah, Adam, every single day it's coming out that the offense is struggling mightily. And it starts with Daniel Jones. We know the offensive line is a mess right now with injuries, ravished with injuries. And we also hear different things about Kenny Golladay just being MIA, and he's supposed to be we talk about it every time, the $20 million wide receiver on the outside is nowhere to be found. And you'd think when the quarterback's struggling or the offensive line is struggling, a older veteran making $20 million a year would say, it's my time to step up, go throw me the ball, get me the ball so I can show what we can do. And it's not happening right now.
Yeah, and that's why $20 million man in price tag only, right? And that's a big part of what's going on here. And so the one thing I'll say is, like, the offensive line is obviously dealing with issues, specifically really at left guard and at center, right? 3/5 of the line hasn't had any real issues throughout this camp. And it's not to diminish any of it. We don't want to see these problems across the front. However, I think this comes back to one of my core beliefs of, when you look back over the first 3 years of Daniel Jones' career, we can all talk about what wasn't well around him, for, weapons, offensive line, everything. But again, like, now, if this year you're coming to the season and there's uncertainty around 2 positions on the line, I can't go back. We can't go back to that again and say, well, that's the reason why. At some point, all you can do is take the sample size you're getting and say, hey, based on what I'm seeing, this is what the evaluation is. And one thing that I found interesting, and this ties back into just what some people were saying on Twitter about, okay, Tyrod Taylor looked good in the preseason game, right? But the real takeaway that I had, and we talked about it, was it looked like they were intentionally conservative in those 2 drives that Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley and the main offense was out there. And it did trigger something for me, which I always thought was easy and probably almost certainly right, to say Jason Garrett was always a conservative play caller. So gosh, you don't do Daniel Jones any favors putting a conservative play caller at the helm, because he's always going to go with okay, let's be timid here. Let's not risk anything. And also, which was another new system for Daniel Jones. And here's another new system. There is also this component, though, of, was Mike Kafka coming out in preseason game number 1 and saying, we want to set a nice baseline, let's not get crazy? And based on where Daniel Jones is in digesting this new system, this is what we feel comfortable running right now. Like that's a big factor. And I don't, again, I'm not trying to come down with a heavy hand on Daniel Jones, but we are now moving towards the second preseason game. And one really good, strong preseason performance from him and a couple of good practices during the week can melt a lot of this away. But to this point, when you go back to that preseason game, you say 6 of 10, remember, one of them was on a quick outside route to Darius Slayton, who took the ball 98% of the receiving yards on that possession, on that particular pass, right? So there are these little things. I don't want to overreact to it. There's the world where it's get the ball out of his hand quickly, and that's all developmental. But I want to get your feedback around him a little bit deeper. And then I also had something that is a bit of a pivot for me in terms of the approach coming into this season and how I think maybe the organization could be looking at this offense.
Again, this is what we do this. He's so polarizing because you talk about the Darius Slayton catch being the bulk of it, but then all of a sudden it's like, well, that one incompletion to Kenny Golladay on the goal line, he could be 7 of 10 with a touchdown, and all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, he's completing 70% of his passes. Look at this, and it's like,
which would be folly too, right? It's folly. It's right. Folly to overanalyze positive or negative. You have to find the middle ground. Yeah.
Either way, it ends up being ridiculous. Either he's the guy or he's not the guy based on one drop from a 5-yard slant route. Right? Like that is the thing that's crazy. Well, I didn't really think about what you had mentioned, and it's interesting. But again, if you believe in Daniel Jones, like I still do, you find ways to wrap and massage the narrative to fit it. Like my simple answer to you on that would be, well, they need to be conservative. They don't want to get anyone hurt. They know who are going to be the first team guys generally. So let's just get them going through the motions. Whereas when Tyrod Taylor comes in, all the guys that he's playing with are competing for roster spots. Yep. And it's like, go make a play. Colin Johnson, go make a play. Like Antonio Williams, run like you've never run before. Guys, like you are looking to make plays. And so for me, like that's when I think they expand the playbook a little bit.
Of course.
Tyrod Taylor has nothing to lose. We know for a fact he is the number 2 quarterback in the room, no matter what happens. He could throw 5 picks and he's still going to be the number 2 quarterback. So like, it's just a different mentality, but I think it is important to ask the question at him. And, you know, you and I talked before this about expectations going into this. Like, are we super concerned? What's the panic level if we continue to see this against the Bengals? And you and I have a little bit of a different panic level, but it's probably based more on your expectations though, right?
Yeah, because this is, we've said it now a few times in the show, global perspective, right? Like if you are Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, and you believe that you were coming into this year with the expectations of Daniel Jones has been done dirty, and we believe that we can make him a franchise quarterback as things go along, et cetera, et cetera. Then, you know, your concern level rises and rises when it doesn't look like he's digesting it and performing well and starting to get his rhythm. If on the other hand, you look at it as the cap was in a total disarray, there was a lot of bad decisions made, a lot of bad contracts given out, and this first year is just about cleaning up all the clutter, and then we're looking to approach next year with our new rookie contract franchise quarterback, then everything kind of becomes relative. And it's really about the overall evaluation that you're doing across this entire roster, as opposed to success this season and Daniel Jones obviously needing to be a key component of that.
You know, the number one thing is compounding mistakes, right? That is something that Joe Schoen is like, nope, we're not going to do that. We're not going to restructure this guy and keep him. We're not going to continue to kick the can down. We're not going to make a knee-jerk signing this year that's going to screw up our cap space next year just so we're slightly more competitive. Yep. He has done the
pertains to the secondary as well. Like, we'll see how that unfolds everywhere across the board.
Right. I mean, still to this moment, the Logan Ryan release is glaring, just thinking like they didn't save any money. He still can perform at a reasonable level as a veteran. They just let him go because he said, I don't want to compound mistakes. I don't want to restructure him just because I need the cap space now, etc. It is interesting. Joe Schoen has basically said, I am setting this up so that we are a healthier organization moving forward. And I think because of that, it hasn't been a huge indicator of whether or not Daniel Jones is the guy or is not the guy. Yep. Now, keep in mind, when they asked Joe Schoen about some of the key cornerstone players, Joe Schoen came out. He mentioned Saquon Barkley, obviously, but he did not mention Daniel Jones. And so, like, clearly, he's basically saying our best option without screwing up the cap is to keep Daniel Jones, hope that he's either serviceable and gets us through the year or exceeds expectations and becomes our franchise guy, because any other decision I make outside of this organization, other than getting a competent backup, would be malpractice for the next season.
That 100%. And I'll leave you with this tease as we wrap this one out. Well, there's a lot to break down. You should have heard the pre-show meeting, the things that I wanted to cover, friends, and we will get into it over these next couple of days. But at the end of the day, grasping at straws, reading the tea leaves. When Joe Schoen mentioned Saquon Barkley as being a cornerstone piece, it did trigger a thought to me. I mean, everyone knows that I've said they should have traded Barkley, pre-injury. They should have traded him this offseason. They could have. However, when you see their recommitment with the way that he looked, and it was interesting because not everyone was like ultra as highly positive, I think, as you and I were. Like, I loved the sample size in preseason game number 1 for Saquon Barkley, north and south running. There's a lot of angles to this, and we'll get into, but I found it interesting that if you say, don't believe that Daniel Jones will be your franchise quarterback, you could organizationally, and then also convince me that Saquon Barkley can have one of those kind of seasons like his rookie year, and you can think about wanting to bring him back, and suddenly the financial commitment there is greatly relieved by the idea of bringing in a rookie quarterback on a rookie contract. So, and what's better for a young rookie quarterback than having a player of that caliber and that talent in the backfield to lean on? It just very fascinating little dynamics started to go off in my head about this. And it really is about where I stand on Daniel Jones and what I think he's capable of.
Well, and you mentioned at the end of the day, Adam, it's funny because I'm like, I still think Daniel Jones could be the guy. And, I like Saquon Barkley. If he performs, maybe we could keep him. And you're like, I don't know. I don't think Daniel Jones is the guy we've seen enough. And we should get as many assets in training camp for Saquon Barkley as possible. We're both kind of flip-flopping because I'm like, man, if they could keep Saquon Barkley and also get a rookie quarterback and really start building something, that would be great. And the last thing I will say on this whole piece of it, because of how we're hearing all these tea leaves, as you mentioned, come out from Joe Schoen and Daboll, this is going to be a run-first team. It is going to be like, whether it's Saquon Barkley getting short passes to manipulate the run game, or it's going to be Antonio Williams or Matt Breida, they're going to rely heavily on Evan Neal as a run blocker early as opposed to a pass blocker. This team is going to have a little bit of a different identity, and that could be because of a whole host of things, like maybe Daniel Jones isn't the guy, but I think that's where they're going to go first and say, let's figure out what kind of team we have if we could just run the rock the way that we want to.
Yeah, tomorrow we're going to dive back into that running back room, ask some questions about the depth chart situation, and then I think it's a great observation. Where is this team going to progressively try to grow this offense? Something that we'll have to judge based on Kafka calling the plays in preseason game number 1. That's still an ebb and flow situation with Brian Daboll as well. So come back in. You get us over on YouTube, subscribe, like it, love it, share it. Same thing for the podcast feed. Really, go over, rate, review it, subscribe. It's totally free, and it really does help us, and we greatly appreciate it. And then tomorrow, like we said, we got a lot to dive back in on. We're breaking it all down. Until then, though, as Andy Mack would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.